Have you ever wondered how Cain, one of the first sons of Adam and Eve, managed to find a wife and have children when Adam and Eve were the only parents of mankind? This mystery has puzzled people for generations. The lack of specific information about the daughters of Adam and Eve in the Bible makes this question even more difficult to answer. However, when we dig deeper into the details and events in the Bible, we can find interesting answers that can shed light on this issue. According to the Bible, Adam and Eve were the first ancestors of mankind, and they had many children, not just Cain and Abel, although no specific names are mentioned. This suggests that in addition to Cain and Abel, Adam and Eve may have had daughters. And in a context where the population was small, marriage between siblings or close relatives was necessary to sustain life on earth. Cain, as the firstborn son, may have married one of his sisters, which makes perfect sense given the historical and cultural circumstances of the time. However, this story also opens up an important message about the perfection of God's plan. Even though humans do not understand all the details or the reasons behind events, we can still trust in His infinite guidance and love. God's plans are perfect, even though we cannot fully understand them. Do you trust in His guidance? Comment, "Lord, I trust in you," so we can pray together and trust in God's protection. The creation of Adam and Eve is one of the most important events in the Bible story, marking the beginning of humanity. According to the book of Genesis, God formed Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. God then created Eve from one of Adam's ribs, establishing the first marital union and beginning humanity. Creation was not only the beginning of life, but also the beginning of the relationship between God and humanity, opening the door to the later biblical story. After Adam and Eve were created and lived in the Garden of Eden, they began to have children. Among their children were Cain and Abel, two brothers who grew up in a world that, although marked by the purity of the original creation, was about to face its first trials and hardships. Cain became a farmer, devoting himself to tilling the land, while Abel became a shepherd, tending his flocks. The Bible tells us that over time, both brothers decided to offer sacrifices to God as a sign of worship and gratitude. Cain brought some fruits from the ground as an offering, while Abel brought the best of his flock, with the fattest and most valuable parts of his sheep. This act of offering was done with a sincere heart, reflecting Abel's excellence and devotion to God. However, God recognized Abel's offering and accepted it, while Cain's was not accepted by him. The exact reason for this difference is not made clear in the Bible, but it is generally understood to be a matter of attitude and the quality of the offering. Abel's offering was considered more important because he gave the best he had, while Cain's offering was not as special. The acceptance and rejection of these offerings led to deep dissatisfaction and anger in Cain, who felt disappointed and discouraged. Not only did Cain feel sad, but his anger turned into jealousy and hatred towards his brother Abel. God noticed Cain's emotional turmoil and warned him of the danger that anger brings. God warned Cain that sin was lurking at the door and that he needed to master his emotions to avoid temptation. This warning from God was intended to prevent Cain from falling into sin and was also an opportunity for him to repent and change. Tested by anger and jealousy, Cain invited Abel to go out into the field, where it was lonely and away from the presence of others. As tensions between the two brothers grew, Cain, consumed by rage and jealousy, attacked and brutally murdered Abel. This act of violence marked the first recorded death in human history and brought a new depth of sin and suffering into the world God had created. After the murder, God confronted Cain and asked about Abel's whereabouts. Cain, trying to cover up his crime, replied nonchalantly, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" Cain's response not only showed that he was trying to escape the consequences of his actions, but also revealed a lack of remorse and responsibility. God, knowing the truth, said that Cain would suffer the consequences of his actions. He would be cursed and made a wanderer on the earth, unable to cultivate the land that had once been his livelihood. Cain's curse was twofold. He would face a life as a farmer that Cain had known now ruined, and the land that he had once cultivated would no longer produce the fruit that he had so successfully cultivated. Cain's response to God's curse shows pain and anxiety about the future. Cain feared that he would be left wandering aimlessly and without protection, worried that someone would find him and take revenge for Abel's death. To address this concern, God placed a mark on Cain. This mark was intended to protect Cain from any possible revenge. Although the mark of Cain is not described in detail in the Bible, it served to ensure that Cain would not be killed by others, even in the face of his curse. After his conversation with God, Cain left his presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The Bible also records that Cain knew his wife, and they had a son named Enoch. In addition, the story states that Cain built a city and named it after his son, Enoch. The building of the city is an important milestone in the story, marking the beginning of the formation of human communities. However, this is where doubts begin to arise. The text does not provide clear details about who Cain met and how he got his wife. In verse 17, we are told only that Cain knew his wife. The existence of other humans besides Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel is an explanation that fills in the gaps in the biblical narrative, answering questions about the growth of human population. So, what do you think about this? Could there be other people that the Bible doesn't mention? Share your thoughts in the comments and leave an amen if you believe that all questions will be answered in due time. Let's pray and learn more about these mysteries. Cain's fear of being killed by others and the mark that God placed on him, as described in the Bible, are factors that raise important questions about the existence of beings other than Adam and Eve. In Genesis 4 verse 14, Cain says, "Today you are driving me from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I will be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." This fear is interesting, as it seems to indicate the existence of a large enough population for Cain to be concerned about the possibility of being found and punished by a group of people. In the next verse, the Bible records that God said to Cain, "Therefore whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold." And God placed a mark on Cain to prevent anyone from finding and killing him. These details help us understand that in the context of the biblical story, the earth may have had a larger population beyond Adam and Eve's family. Cain's fear of being found and God's intervention to protect him suggests a more widespread human presence than the central figures of the story, indicating a substantial and dispersed population that coexisted with the original family. One of the less accepted explanations is that God may have created other humans independently in addition to Adam and Eve. Proponents of this theory argue that to explain the rapid growth of the human population described in the Bible, a large number of individuals would be needed, which would be difficult to achieve with just the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. This theory attempts to reconcile the biblical narrative with archaeological and anthropological evidence, which points to the existence of larger human communities in the ancient period. Evidence such as the existence of complex societies and traces of early human habitation seem to suggest a larger population scenario. It should be noted, however, that this interpretation remains speculative and is not directly supported by the Bible. There is no direct reference to other contemporaneous groups of humans in the family of Adam and Eve. The Bible does not provide further details about the creation of humanity beyond the original family, limiting the story to a more focused and specific description. Therefore, although this theory attempts to make the biblical story consistent with scientific findings, it is not confirmed by the sacred text and remains a controversial hypothesis among scholars and theologians. On the other hand, the most widely accepted theory is that Cain may have married a sister or niece based on the cultural practices and context of the time described in the biblical story. The Bible in Genesis does not explicitly state that Adam and Eve had only Cain and Abel as children. In fact, in Genesis 4 verse 1, Adam made love to his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord I have brought forth a man," referring to Cain, but there is no similar statement after Abel is born, suggesting that there may have been other children born between these two events. The lack of explicit mention of other sons and daughters between Cain and Abel has led some scholars and theologians to speculate that Adam and Eve had more children than are directly recorded. Cultural and historical knowledge of the period suggests that families often had large numbers of children, and the absence of a specific prohibition in the biblical text opens up the possibility that Cain may have married a sister or close relative. This interpretation is further supported by the mention of other sons and daughters of Adam and Eve in Genesis 5 verse 4, after Seth was born, with the verse, "And the days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years, and he begot sons and daughters." This reference suggests that the lineage of Adam and Eve extended far beyond the sons mentioned separately. Thus, The biblical text does not limit Adam and Eve's children to just Cain, Abel, and Seth, opening up the possibility of a broader interpretation of their family size. It should be noted that in the absence of a large population beyond Adam and Eve's family, the idea that Cain married a sister becomes a plausible explanation for the continuation of the human lineage in the cultural and temporal context of the biblical narrative. Marriage between siblings or close relatives is a controversial concept in today's society, especially when we consider modern cultural and ethical norms. However, in the context of ancient times, when humanity was still in its early stages of formation and development, marriage between close relatives was not only acceptable, but also a necessary factor to maintain the development of the human species. In particular, when we look at the events described in the Bible, we see that marriage between siblings or close relatives was not just an option, but an essential part of God's plan for the continuation of the human race. In Genesis, one of the prominent stories of sibling marriage is the story of Noah's sons. If you find this information useful and interesting, don't forget to click like and share this video with your friends to explore the secrets of the Bible together. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next interesting videos. We look forward to accompanying you on your journey to learn God's Word. After the great flood wiped out all living things on earth, Noah and his wife and their 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, were the only survivors. In order to repopulate the earth, Noah's sons were forced to marry their sisters, since there were no other people left outside Noah's family. This is a typical case, showing that in the early times, when the population was very small and the world was not yet civilized, marriage between close relatives was inevitable. We cannot fully understand the social and environmental context of this period without acknowledging that close marriage was necessary for the survival and development of humanity. From a religious perspective, the Bible not only tells us that marriage between siblings was a normal practice in the early stages of humanity, but also emphasizes that it was done according to a larger plan that God had in mind. Therefore, although marriage between close relatives may be forbidden or considered inappropriate in many cultures today, for first generations, especially in the post-flood events, it was an indispensable part of sustaining life on earth. The story of Noah and his family is not the only case in the Bible where we see marriage between close relatives. Another example that can be mentioned is the marriage between Abraham and his half-sister Sarah. This is a clear demonstration that in that period, marital relationships between close family members were normal and accepted. We need to understand that the social and moral norms of that time period were very different from what they are today. These forms of marriage were not transgressions or wrongs, but rather part of God's larger plan for humanity. In fact, the Bible does not forbid marriage between siblings or close relatives in the early stages of human history. Instead, it demonstrates the necessity of these relationships for the survival and development of a people. This applies not only to figures like Noah or Abraham, but also to many other biblical figures who lived in times when the human population was very small. Marriage between siblings or close relatives is the only way to ensure that the human race will continue to thrive and multiply, no matter how much time and space changes. However, when we speak of marriage between close relatives in the biblical context, we must also be aware that the Bible does not intend to encourage or celebrate these relationships as a permanent norm. In fact, we find that strict regulations on marriage between close relatives were laid down in the Mosaic Law, and the prohibition of marriage between siblings or close relatives became part of the later legal system. This shows that although in the early stages, marriage between close relatives was necessary, as the human population grew and society developed, moral and legal standards also changed. From a deeper perspective, the story of Noah and his family, like other stories in the Bible, emphasizes an important element of human development: the need to maintain a lasting relationship with God and with each other. The moral and spiritual choices that biblical characters made had a profound impact on human history. Although in the early days these close relationships were necessary to ensure survival, the Bible also shows us that social growth and change were part of God's plan, leading humanity from primitive times to more civilized stages of development. In our lives today, we can see this story not only as a part of biblical history, but also as a reminder of the sacredness of family relationships and respect for the moral values that God has given us. Marriage, whether between relatives or not, has profound significance in maintaining social stability and spiritual growth. Marital relationships, family, and community are essential elements in building a better life based on the principles and teachings of the Bible. Ultimately, as we reflect on marriage between close relatives in the Bible, it is important to understand that it is all part of God's grand plan for humanity. Human development, social change, and moral and spiritual relationships all reflect God's guidance in every situation. Sibling marriage, although no longer appropriate in today's world, is, in the biblical context, a necessity for protection and development of humanity in its early stages of formation. Another important example is Abraham's marriage to his half-sister Sarah. The story in Genesis 20, verse 12, confirms that Abraham and Sarah were half-siblings. At that time, marriage between close relatives, such as half-siblings, was acceptable and often necessary to maintain the continuity of the family line. Isaac, Abraham's son, followed this tradition by marrying his cousin Rebekah. Marriages between cousins were common and reflected the cultural norms of ancient society. Similarly, Jacob, Abraham's grandson, married his cousins Leah and Rachel. These marriages, while they may seem unusual today, were established norms within the culture and historical context of the time period. It is important to note that the laws prohibiting marriage between close relatives, as described in the Mosaic Law, were established long after these events, some 2,500 years after the creation of Adam and Eve. These laws, part of the covenant given to Moses, established stricter moral and social standards, reflecting the evolution of cultural norms and the need to maintain genetic health and social order in an increasingly complex society. The biblical narrative often focuses on the story of Cain and Abel, two of the more famous sons of Adam and Eve. Interestingly, the Jewish and Christian traditions often ignore the stories of secondary characters, instead focusing on more dramatic stories. This tendency sometimes overshadows the presence and journey of other sons and daughters in humanity's first family. This leaves a gap in understanding the experiences and fates of other family members whose lives also played important roles in the course of human history. Although the Bible mentions in Genesis 5 verse for that Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters in addition to Cain and Abel, it seems that the absence of specific names for these daughters in the Bible has contributed to their story being forgotten, keeping them anonymous, while Cain and Abel take on central roles. This not only reflects a limited depiction of female characters in the Bible, but also the focus of the story on male characters, especially the sons of Adam and Eve, who play an important role in the continuation of the human race. This does not mean that the daughters of Adam and Eve are not important, but may be a way to emphasize the role of men in the maintenance and development of humanity. We can see that in many ancient cultures, women are often not mentioned much in historical records, especially in religious texts such as the Bible. This not only reflects the cultural views of the time, but also highlights the issues of the importance of genealogy and lineage, in which the role of men is often placed first. On the other hand, it is completely understandable that the Bible cannot cover the lives of all its characters. The Bible, although an extremely important book and having a profound influence on the faith of millions of people around the world, clearly cannot contain the entire history of mankind from the creation of the universe to the end of the world. This book focuses only on the most important messages, spiritual and moral lessons that God wanted to convey to mankind. It is almost impossible to describe the vastness of information from the creation of the world to the end of the world in a single book. So it is inevitable that there will be some omissions and a focus on the more important parts. In this context, secondary books such as the Book of Jubilees emerged as an alternative source to explore details about some of the lesser-known figures in the Bible, including the daughters of Adam and Eve. Although not widely recognized in major religious traditions such as Judaism and Christianity, the Book of Jubilees plays an important role in providing additional information about events and figures that are not mentioned in detail in the official Bible. This book, although an apocryphal text, is still considered a valuable resource for understanding the history and side details of the Bible story that the official Bible does not cover. The Book of Jubilees, with its extensive details of genealogies and events, gives us a better look at characters that the Bible does not go into detail about. One notable feature is the appearance of daughters of Adam and Eve, who may have played an important role in the development of humanity, but are not mentioned in the official Bible. These details, while not widely accepted, still create a more complete picture of ancient history and the relationships between biblical characters. Instead, They serve as supplementary material that helps readers better understand the historical and cultural context of the periods described in the Bible. In this context, learning more about characters like the daughters of Adam and Eve through secondary texts helps us better understand their important roles in human history. Although these women are not given much credit in the official Bible, their role in the family and in maintaining the family line was indispensable in ancient society. The Bible, while not delving into their stories, shows that each character, recognized or not, had an important part in the larger story that God had laid out for humanity. These forgotten figures, so to speak, provide a broader perspective on the extensive lineage of the first couple. However, it is important to emphasize that the Book of Jubilees is considered a pagan book, meaning that it is not part of the official Jewish or Christian Bible, simply because there is no consensus on its authorship and origin, as well as interpretations that differ from the widely accepted versions. However, the historical value of the Book of Jubilees should not be overlooked. It provides a unique insight into the events recounted in Genesis, especially those involved in the creation of the world, Adam and Eve, and other Old Testament figures. Its nickname, Little Genesis, reflects its direct connection to the events and figures described in Genesis. This pagan book offers a deeper interpretation of history that goes beyond what is found in the Bible, including the naming of Adam and Eve's daughters and descriptions of their lives. The story is particularly important to some Jewish and Christian communities, seeking additional understanding of important events in the Old Testament. When we look in the Book of Jubilees to find the names of Adam and Eve's daughters, we find the characters Awan and Asherah identified as the wives of Cain and Seth, respectively. In Genesis 4 verses 16 to 17, we read, "So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain made love to his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Cain was then building a city, and he named it after his son Enoch." According to some Jewish traditions, Awan, also known as On, is identified as the wife of Cain, the eldest son of Adam and Eve. Although her name does not appear in the Bible, it is mentioned in pagan texts such as the Book of Jubilees. Interpretations of her name, which are related to Hebrew or Phoenician, suggest meanings such as sin or power. As Cain's wife, her name may symbolize the power or influence she exerted in the lineage that began with Adam and Eve. The story of Cain and Awan may reflect the trials and tribulations that Cain and Awan face in their lives after Cain's exile. After his exile, Cain met Awan, and the biblical story emphasizes that he founded the city of Enoch and named it after his son. The Book of Jubilees also mentions the city as one of Cain's accomplishments after the tragic incident involving Abel. When placed alongside Cain, Awan becomes an important link in the lineage, becoming a central figure in the major events following Cain's exile for murdering Abel. Although the Bible does not explicitly identify Cain's wife or her origins, by the time we get to the point where Cain is exiled and meets the woman in question, very few characters are mentioned, including Adam, Eve, and their children Abel and Seth. However, it is important to consider that by the time Cain married Awan, the earth was probably already quite populated. By this time, there were certainly more than 5, including women in addition to Eve. Some have suggested that Cain's wife may have been his granddaughter, the daughter of Seth. This idea is based on a long period between Cain's exile in the land of Nod and his encounter with Awan. Some theologians posit that this period spanned some 300 years, and during this time, it is estimated that Adam's children exceeded 50, while Seth's sons exceeded 20. Another interesting aspect of the early generations is the incredible longevity of the antediluvian figures. These patriarchs lived incredibly long lives that defy modern notions of human longevity. This phenomenon is particularly evident in the genealogies described in the Book of Genesis, where we see figures like Adam, Seth, and Methuselah living for hundreds of years. The lives of these figures provide an interesting glimpse into the conditions and capabilities of humans in ancient biblical times. Adam, the first man, lived 930 years, according to Genesis 5, verse 5. His son Seth, who was born after Abel's death and played a key role in continuing the human line, lived 912 years, according to Genesis 5, verse 8. Enosh, Adam's grandson, lived 905 years, according to Genesis 5, verse 11. These examples show that in the early days of humanity, Longevity was not the exception but the rule. Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, was known to have lived 969 years, the longest-lived person mentioned in the Bible. Several theories have attempted to explain this extraordinary longevity. One hypothesis is the idea of an early perfect environment, where climatic, atmospheric, and environmental conditions may have contributed to a longer lifespan. According to this view, the Earth's pre-flood atmosphere may have provided additional protection against harmful radiation and other factors that normally contribute to aging. Some other scholars suggest that the genetics of early humans were different and stronger, allowing for longer lives. Additionally, some biblical interpretations suggest that there may have been a divine change or a change in the laws of nature after the flood. According to Genesis 6 verse 3, God declared, "Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. This statement may indicate a planned decrease in human lifespan after the flood, which corresponds to the gradual decrease in lifespan observed in subsequent generations. After the flood, the lifespans of biblical figures decreased markedly. For example, Abraham, one of the most famous figures in the Old Testament, lived for 175 years, and Moses, one of the most prominent figures in the Old Testament, lived for 120 years. This gradual decline can be explained by a number of changes. One popular theory is that environmental conditions changed after flood. Another factor may be the gradual decline in genetic quality in later generations due to inbreeding. This decline in life expectancy may also reflect a change in God's plan and condition of humanity. Some scholars believe that God adjusted the human lifespan to fit the times and realities of the post-flood world, where the need for such a long life became less important. We can conclude that when Cain considered marrying, he had many sisters and nieces available, making it easier for him to find a wife who was close by blood. Marriage between relatives, as we mentioned earlier, continued for a long time. It was only when the population increased significantly that prohibitions on sexual relations between relatives were established to prevent negative consequences, such as the risk of genetic defects and health problems caused by inbreeding. The Bible makes it clear that all humanity descended from Adam and Eve, and any theory that contradicts this lacks biblical basis, as stated in Acts 17, verse 26. From one man, he made every nation of men to inhabit the whole earth, and he determined their appointed times and their borders. This view sheds light on relationships in that era and the formation of humanity from a single original couple, Adam and Eve's other daughter, detailed in the book of Jubilees and called Asherah, is recognized as the wife of Seth, the third son of Adam and Eve. Her symbolic association with the blue sky, or lapis lazuli, evokes heavenly purity, and her name reflects the uniqueness she represents in the story as Seth's wife. Asherah directly influences a continuation of the righteous lineage, contributing to the preservation of the values and virtues that the biblical genealogy aspires to. It is important to remember that Seth was born after the death of Abel. Eve believed that God had appointed Seth to establish a new lineage in place of Abel, who was murdered by Cain. According to these traditions, Asherah was originally the wife of Abel and became a widow after his death, before marrying Seth. From this marriage came notable descendants. Seth is an important figure in biblical genealogy and played a key role in continuing the righteous line after the disturbance with Cain. His marriage to Asherah made important contributions to biblical events. Among Seth's children, Enosh stood out, with his name meaning weak one. Enosh is known as the first to develop the invocation of the name of God, establishing a spiritual connection that would later become a central practice in subsequent religious traditions. Alongside Enosh, Enoch, the son of Seth, was another notable figure in this lineage. Enoch was known for his special relationship with God, to the point of walking with God. In the biblical narrative, his righteous life and direct communication with God stand out as an example of dedication that was far ahead of his time. Enoch was thus one of the only humans to escape death, but to be taken up by God. However, one of the most important contributions from Seth's lineage was Noah, the righteous builder of the ark during the Great Flood. Noah, son of Lamech and grandson of Seth, was chosen by God to preserve humanity and the diversity of living things during a global catastrophe. Cain, the eldest son of Adam and Eve, represents a path marked by choices that reflect human failure. In contrast, the lineages of Seth and Azra offer a story of moral and spiritual choices tied to divine will. Despite their distinct differences, these two lines are both meaningful and reflect the inherent opposition in the human condition, with moral and spiritual choices shaping the fate of generations to come. God uses the Bible to show us what is most important: His love, His justice, and how He wants us to live. It is important to understand that a book like the Bible cannot cover every history or every person. The Bible is more like a guide to help us know God and follow Him. It helps us understand what is important in our lives and our relationship with Him without trying to cover every aspect of life and history. God's plans are perfect, but they are also bigger than we can ever fully understand. The Bible gives us a glimpse of God's love and justice, but it does not reveal all of His purposes. In Isaiah 55 verses 8 to 9 we read, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This means that there are things about God and His plan that we cannot understand. God does not expect us to understand everything. He wants us to trust Him and seek His love and guidance. The Bible is a gift that helps us know God better and live according to His teachings, even when we do not know all the details at the moment. So we have explored together an interesting and mysterious question in the Bible. How was Cain, the firstborn son of Adam and Eve, able to find a wife and have children when they were the only humans in the world at that time? The Bible does not say this explicitly, but through interesting details, we see that although the stories of Adam and Eve's daughters are not mentioned, the possibility of Cain marrying one of his sisters was very possible under the circumstances. This gives us another glimpse into how God had prepared for the development of humanity from the very beginning. God always has perfect plans, even when we don't fully understand them. The important thing is that we always trust in His guidance. Do you believe that everything in life has a purpose from God? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you find this story interesting and want to learn more about the mysteries and wonderful messages in the Bible, don't forget to like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any videos from us. We look forward to accompanying you on your journey to explore the Bible and learn the wonders in it. Wishing you a blessed day and God's protection.
Have you ever wondered about the deep secrets hidden within the stories of the Bible? One of the most intriguing stories is that of Potiphar and Joseph. In the shadowy corridors of ancient Egypt, where the absolute power of Pharaoh ruled everything, Potiphar, a powerful official, held a crucial position as the captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard. But what makes us curious is, was Potiphar truly a eunuch, as some Bible translations suggest? Or is it just a hypothesis that has been built up over time? This story doesn't end here. The secret of Potiphar and Joseph might make you reconsider how power and loyalty were controlled in a brutal ancient society. Let's dive into the details of Joseph's life, from when he was sold into slavery to the challenges he faced in Potiphar's house. In today's video, we will explore strange events, unexpected situations, and profound lessons. So, what do you think about Potiphar and the story behind this character? Do you believe there's a truth hidden behind those rumors? If you find these discoveries intriguing, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our upcoming videos. Together, we will uncover secrets yet to be revealed. Potiphar, a character mentioned in the Bible story from the book of Genesis, was a powerful and influential man in ancient Egypt. He was an official of Pharaoh and held the position of captain of the bodyguard, meaning he occupied a vital role in Egypt's governing system, reflecting his significant influence not only in the military but also in politics. Potiphar played an extremely important role, commanding Pharaoh's bodyguard to protect Egypt's supreme ruler, a task that required absolute loyalty and exceptional military skills. Moreover, he also supervised the imprisonment of national prisoners, including Pharaoh's enemies and anyone considered a threat to the throne. This position made Potiphar one of the most trusted and powerful individuals in Egypt. He had direct access to Pharaoh and participated in the most sensitive affairs of the kingdom. Potiphar's wealth and influence were also reflected in his residence, which was not just a house but a symbol of his status, a common feature for high-ranking officials. Potiphar lived in a luxurious house decorated with the finest Egyptian artifacts of the time. His home, described in the Bible as prosperous under Joseph's management, was a center of power where important decisions were made and where he hosted high-ranking guests. In Genesis 39:1, the Bible introduces Potiphar as follows. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And this is where all the controversy and doubts surrounding Potiphar begin. The term eunuch, used in some traditional Bible translations, refers to men who had been castrated, often before puberty in ancient times, particularly in Eastern cultures. In Egypt, eunuchs were sometimes chosen for important and trusted positions in the royal court. It was believed that those in this condition would be more loyal, having no family ties that could threaten the king's power. Castration was a common practice in many ancient cultures, including Mesopotamia, Persia, and during certain periods of Egyptian history. Eunuchs were often given important roles, such as guardians of the harem, advisors, and administrative officials because of the trust that kings placed in them. Castration was seen as a way to create servants who were incapable of reproduction, thus minimizing the risks of dynastic ambitions. However, castration also carried with it a significant social and personal stigma, as the condition of being a eunuch was often associated with the loss of masculine power and personal authority. In many Bible stories, we can observe traces of castration, which was a strategy of power and control. A prominent example is King Artaxerxes, mentioned in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, who ruled the Persian Empire firmly throughout his reign. Castration was a common practice to ensure the absolute loyalty of those holding positions near the throne, such as eunuchs serving in the royal palace. This practice not only ensured the loyalty of the king's wives, preventing extramarital relations, but also turned these men into submissive tools in the hands of the king, making them instruments for royal ceremonies and events. During the reign of King Nebuchadnezzar, known for his unrelenting conquests and desire to solidify absolute power, castrating captured prisoners became a widespread and feared practice. This brutal practice was both a physical punishment and a means of subjugating conquered peoples, stripping away their masculinity and thus their ability to resist Babylonian rule. By castrating his enemies, Nebuchadnezzar not only ensured military victory, but also crushed the spirit of entire nations, leaving scars not just on the body, but in the minds of the survivors. The physical pain that prisoners endured became a prolonged form of humiliation and psychological trauma, serving as a psychological weapon that echoed far beyond the battlefield. The fear of castration became a powerful tool of control, capable of intimidating future enemies and ensuring submission even before conflicts began. This ruthless strategy solidified Nebuchadnezzar's power, making him not only a conqueror, but also a symbol of terror and dominance throughout the region. In 587 BC, one of the darkest events in Israel's history took place. When the Babylonian army, under the command of the ruthless King Nebuchadnezzar, besieged and destroyed the city of Jerusalem, ending with the destruction of the temple and the capture of King Zedekiah. Fear spread throughout the city at that time, but in our present-day lives, anxiety and insecurity have not disappeared completely. However, if you believe in Jesus Christ in your heart, you will be saved. Leave an amen in the comments if you always believe that. Returning to Israel, Zedekiah's reign began during a period already filled with challenges. He ascended the throne amidst political instability, with the kingdom of Judah facing an increasing threat from the expansion of Babylon, despite continuous warnings from the prophets urging the people to be cautious and obey God. Zedekiah, feeling cornered, decided to break his alliance with Babylon and seek military assistance from Egypt, a decision that would prove to be a grave mistake. This formation of an alliance with Egypt was seen by Nebuchadnezzar as a direct betrayal, as Zedekiah had ascended the throne as a loyal subject of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar reacted swiftly and brutally. He mobilized his army and marched toward Jerusalem, determined to punish Zedekiah's rebellion and crush any resistance. The siege of Jerusalem lasted for an extended period and devastated the city, pushing it to the brink of famine and despair. Ultimately, the collapse of Israel was inevitable. In his final moment of desperation, Zedekiah attempted to flee the city under the cover of darkness with a small group. However, the escape proved futile. The Babylonian army captured Zedekiah on the plains of Jericho and immediately brought him before Nebuchadnezzar to face the consequences of his disobedience. In a rage over the betrayal, and also to set an example for those who refused to obey, Nebuchadnezzar subjected Zedekiah to a harsh trial, where his sentence was decided with ruthless calculation. The Babylonian king ordered the execution of Zedekiah's sons right before his eyes. This act not only caused unspeakable pain to Zedekiah as he witnessed the extinction of his bloodline, but also served to ensure that no member of the house of David would survive to challenge Babylon's rule in the future. But the punishment didn't stop there. After his sons were executed, Zedekiah endured a final, horrific punishment. His eyes were gouged out. This punishment represented his complete helplessness and humiliation. Blinded and broken, Zedekiah was taken as a prisoner to Babylon, where he spent the rest of his days in captivity, bearing not only the scars of his body, but also the weight of responsibility for the downfall of his people. This pivotal moment in biblical history underscores the brutality of Nebuchadnezzar and the uncompromising reality of Babylonian imperial power, which tolerated no betrayal and used castration as a tool to secure its dominance and spread fear. Those who dared to challenge its authority would be punished. However, today's video focuses on the peculiar case of Potiphar and Joseph. Joseph was the 11th son of Jacob, also known as Israel, and the firstborn of his beloved wife Rachel. From a young age, Joseph stood out among his brothers, not only because he was his father's favored son, but also because of his prophetic dreams, which hinted at a future where he would be the one in charge of his family. Jacob did not hide his special affection for Joseph. He gave him a richly ornamented coat, a gift that symbolized not only his father's unique love, but also a significant position in the family. This coat also marked a clear distinction between the sons, sparking jealousy and hatred among Joseph's brothers, who felt abandoned and filled with anger. The situation worsened when Joseph began sharing his dreams. He told his brothers, "I had a dream we were binding sheaves of grain in the field. My sheaf stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Shortly after, Joseph had another dream. He said, "I saw the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowing down to me." These dreams were understood as signs that Joseph, the youngest of the brothers, would one day rule over them, further intensifying the hatred his brothers felt toward him. Unable to bear the thought of submitting to Joseph, his brothers conspired against him. One day, they took their flocks to graze in a field a little farther away, and Jacob sent Joseph to check on them and see if all was well with the brothers and the flocks. When they saw Joseph approaching from a distance, wearing his colorful coat, his brothers began to plot together. "This is our chance. Let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns here, and then tell our father that a wild animal has devoured him." However, Reuben, the eldest brother who had a kind heart, said, "We don't need to shed any blood. Let's throw him into this cistern and leave him there." All the brothers agreed to this plan, unaware that Reuben intended to return later after the others had gone to rescue Joseph and bring him back to their father. When Joseph approached, his brothers immediately attacked him and stripped off the colorful coat that Jacob had made for him. Then they threw Joseph into the cistern, left him there, and sat down to eat their meal casually. As evening approached, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders passed by. They were on their way to Egypt with camels loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh. While Reuben was away, Judah saw them and said, "Why don't we sell Joseph to them as a slave? That way, we can get rid of him without killing him." So, they decided to sell Joseph to the caravan for 20 shekels of silver. This journey to Egypt, filled with fear and uncertainty, took Joseph far from his homeland and family, thrusting him into an uncertain future. Meanwhile, to cover up their crime, Joseph's brothers killed a goat, took its blood, and dipped Joseph's beautiful coat in it. They brought the coat back to their father, Jacob, and when he saw the blood-stained coat, he was horrified. He cried out, "This is Joseph's coat. My beloved son has been devoured by a wild animal." Jacob mourned deeply in unbearable grief, and no one could comfort him. From that moment, Joseph's life took a new turn. What challenges await him in the future? If you're interested and want to learn more, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join us as we explore this video further. It was here that Joseph was taken in by Potiphar, a high-ranking eunuch in Pharaoh's court. From the moment Joseph entered Potiphar's house, the Bible emphasizes that God was always with Joseph, and everything he did was guided by him. In Genesis 39 verse 2, the Bible says, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man." God turned difficult circumstances into opportunities for Joseph to display his talents and character. When Joseph entered Potiphar's house, he was not just a slave, he became the manager of Potiphar's estate. God granted Joseph extraordinary wisdom, and Potiphar's household prospered under his management. So much so that Potiphar, recognizing Joseph's exceptional abilities, entrusted him with managing the entire household and all his possessions. What about you? Can you imagine yourself in Joseph's position, from the lowest place becoming the steward of your master's most valuable possessions? Perhaps God is telling you that no matter where you are, no matter your circumstances, He can lift you up and give you opportunities you never expected. But what happens when Joseph's success attracts unwanted attention? Potiphar's wife, a powerful woman, became captivated by Joseph's appearance and integrity. She relentlessly sought to seduce him, and one day, when no one else was in the house, she took her chance. Yet despite the attack, Joseph remained firm in his refusal. He said, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Genesis 39:9. What a powerful statement, right? Joseph not only preserved his own integrity, but also respected the trust his master had placed in him and honored God's justice. If you were in Joseph's shoes, what would you do? Could you stand firm against such temptation? And then, in a defining moment, when Potiphar's wife attempted to force Joseph into wrongdoing, Joseph did not hesitate, but ran away, leaving his cloak in her hands. It was a courageous act, not just because he wanted to avoid sin, but because he understood that, even when things might seem unfair, he had to remain loyal to God. This makes me think about those times in life when we face difficult and sometimes unjust situations. What would you do when you have to choose between what's right and what's wrong, between loyalty and betrayal? But the story doesn't end there. In her anger and shame from being rejected, Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph of a crime he didn't commit. She shouted that Joseph had attempted to assault her, and the cloak Joseph left behind became evidence for her accusation. When Potiphar heard his wife's words and saw the cloak, he became furious. However, what's interesting is that Potiphar did not sentence Joseph to death, but instead threw him into the royal prison. This shows that although Joseph was falsely accused, Potiphar still trusted his character and did not rush to judgment. Isn't it true that sometimes in life, we too need patience and to listen to both sides before making a judgment? When Joseph was imprisoned, perhaps he felt abandoned, but the Bible says, "The Lord was with Joseph." Genesis 39 verse 21. While many might have thought Joseph would easily give up his faith and hope, it was in that dark prison that he became the manager of the prisoners, bringing order and purpose to everything. Joseph was not just a skilled manager, he was a model of perseverance, faith, and loyalty. No matter the challenges, God remained with Joseph. Are you feeling like you're going through a tough time in life? Remember, God will never forsake you, and He will always guide you on the right path, no matter how difficult that path may seem. Keep trusting, persevere, and walk with God. With his character and management skills, Joseph earned the trust of the warden, who assigned him the responsibility of taking care of the other prisoners and overseeing the activities in the prison. Just like in Potiphar's house, everything under Joseph's management was orderly, even in the bleak conditions of imprisonment. The story of Joseph then leads us to a pivotal moment in his life, when he went from a forgotten prisoner to someone who would rise to great power. But before we delve into that transformation, let's revisit the moment when Joseph met Pharaoh's two officials in prison. This story is not just a dramatic part of the Bible, but also a testament to patience and trust in God's guidance. Even though Joseph had been left in prison for so long and seemed to have no way out, he kept his faith strong in God. One day, when he met two new friends, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker, Joseph didn't just notice their plight, but was willing to share his faith in God's revelations. Have you ever felt like you were in a lonely place, as if no one cared for you? But it is in those moments that God may lead us to unexpected opportunities to help and bring clarity to things that others cannot understand. When these two men shared their dreams with him, Joseph immediately recognized that this was his chance to show that only God could interpret dreams. In Genesis 48, Joseph said, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." This shows us that even though Joseph had the ability to interpret dreams, he never became complacent. He remained humble and acknowledged that everything came from God. What can we learn from this humility? We can be talented and successful, but we should never forget that all good things come from God. The cupbearer's dream was one of hope, about a vine with 3 branches from which he made wine for Pharaoh. Joseph explained that these 3 branches symbolized 3 days, and in 3 days he would be restored to his position and return to serve Pharaoh as before. Joseph asked the cupbearer to remember him when he was freed and to plead with Pharaoh on his behalf, telling him about his circumstances. However, Joseph's joy didn't last long when the chief baker shared his dream. His dream had 3 baskets of bread on his head, with birds eating the bread from the top basket. Joseph sadly explained that the 3 baskets also symbolized 3 days, but the outcome would be different. The baker would be hanged, and the birds would eat his flesh. This reminds me of a big question in life. Why are some people freed, while others face a worse fate? The truth is, sometimes we can't understand the reasons behind events, but like Joseph, we need to trust in God's fairness, no matter the outcome. 3 days later, everything Joseph had said came true. The cupbearer was restored to his position and the baker was executed. However, as we see in the Bible, the cupbearer forgot his promise. He did not remember Joseph, causing Joseph to remain in prison for 2 more years. This is a crucial part of the story. Even when we do good and remain honest, we don't always receive immediate rewards. But one thing Joseph did very well was not giving up his faith. Have you ever felt forgotten when your efforts went unrecognized? Don't forget that in those moments, God is still by your side and has a wonderful plan for you. Finally, one day, Pharaoh had 2 strange dreams that no one in his court could interpret. At this moment, the cupbearer remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the Hebrew man who had interpreted his dream while they were both in prison. Pharaoh summoned Joseph. This was a major turning point in Joseph's life, from an unknown prisoner to someone with a great opportunity. When Pharaoh asked about his dream, Joseph humbly said, "Interpreting dreams is not for me, but God will give Pharaoh the answer." This is an important lesson about humility and trusting in God's power in our lives. Joseph explained that Pharaoh's dream revealed that there would be 7 years of abundance, followed by 7 years of severe famine. Not only did Joseph interpret the dream, but he also proposed a strategy to deal with the crisis, to store food during the 7 years of abundance in preparation for the famine. Pharaoh was deeply impressed by Joseph's wisdom and discernment and appointed him as the governor of Egypt, giving him authority to manage the country and implement the plan. Joseph's life changed completely from this point. From a forgotten prisoner, he became the most powerful man in Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. Joseph was given the Egyptian name Zaphenath-Paneah and married Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. This marriage helped solidify Joseph's position in Egyptian society, elevating him into the elite class and clarifying his powerful status. Joseph's story is a clear testament that even in difficult circumstances, if we persevere and trust in God, He will lift us up at the right moment. Have you ever gone through challenges that, looking back, you realized were stepping stones to better things? Always remember that, even if you feel like Joseph in the prison right now, God has a wonderful plan for you. Just be patient and keep walking in faith. Like Joseph, the challenges we face often don't reveal their true meaning until we look back from a different perspective. However, as Joseph's story unfolds, there are some misunderstandings and misinterpretations concerning the characters in his life. One common misconception is about Potiphar. Over time, some incorrect ideas have arisen, claiming that Potiphar was a eunuch who changed his gender and was later named Potiphar. However, this explanation, although circulated in some teachings, has no basis in the Bible and results from a confusion between two different characters. Such misunderstandings can lead to distorted interpretations of the biblical characters. The Bible never mentions that Potiphar, the Egyptian officer who bought Joseph as a slave, changed his gender or name. A misinterpretation like this might come from confusion or a lack of attention to the context and distinction between different characters in the Bible. It is important to emphasize that Potiphar and Potiphar are two completely separate individuals. In fact, these are two entirely different figures in the biblical story. Potiphar, mentioned in Genesis 39, is the captain of Pharaoh's bodyguard who bought Joseph and made him his steward. He plays a significant role in Joseph's early life in Egypt, but his story is unrelated to Potiphar, apart from the coincidence of their names. Potiphar, who is introduced in Genesis 41:45. Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife, and Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. The confusion between these two names could lead to misunderstandings, but it is important to understand that Potiphar and Potiphar played different roles in Joseph's story and are not the same person. The question of whether Potiphar was castrated or whether he was a eunuch is a controversial issue. There is no direct evidence in the Bible that supports this. In fact, the Bible story focuses more on his position of power and his relationship with Joseph than on details about his physical condition. You may have heard the term eunuch and wondered if Potiphar was a eunuch. Some opinions suggest that Potiphar may have been a eunuch, and this idea has become part of the interpretation of his character. However, according to the Bible, the term used in Genesis 39 verse 1 to describe Potiphar is saris in Hebrew. This term is often translated as official or eunuch, but that does not mean Potiphar was necessarily castrated. As you can see, the word saris in Hebrew can have multiple meanings depending on the context. In the ancient world, especially in Egyptian society, saris did not necessarily refer to a man who had been castrated. In fact, in many cultures, this term could refer to high-ranking officials in the royal court, individuals who held very important and trustworthy duties. In the case of Potiphar, he is described as a respected official of Pharaoh, who managed Pharaoh's household and possessions excellently. So why is there this confusion? The answer may lie in the different interpretations and understandings over the centuries. In many later versions of the Bible, some translators chose not to translate the term saris as eunuch, but simply as official to avoid unnecessary misunderstandings. In this way, we can focus on what the Bible truly emphasizes about Potiphar, a powerful man with high responsibilities in Pharaoh's court, not on the details of his physical condition. This becomes even clearer when we look at the relationship between Potiphar and his wife. In ancient Egyptian society, eunuchs were often not allowed to marry or maintain family relationships. Therefore, the fact that Potiphar had a wife and that she attempted to seduce Joseph casts doubt on the theory that he was a eunuch. Furthermore, a figure like Potiphar, who held a high position in society and was trusted to the point of entrusting his entire household and assets to Joseph, certainly could not have been a eunuch, as this would contradict the cultural and social norms of that time. Thus, through the explanation of this detail, we can see that the Bible does not focus on clarifying the details of Potiphar's physical condition or gender. What is more important is that the Bible wants us to focus on Potiphar's character and role in Joseph's story. Potiphar was a man of power, trusted by Pharaoh, and had significant responsibilities in society. This highlights Joseph's integrity, as he was the only one Potiphar trusted to manage everything, even in the most challenging circumstances. So, in Joseph's journey, from being sold into slavery as a young brother to being imprisoned and ultimately rising to the position of governor of Egypt, we see God's presence in every situation. Although Joseph had to go through continuous trials, he always maintained his faith and trusted in God's guidance. And as you can notice, Joseph's story is also a reminder for us. No matter how difficult life may be, or how much we may be misunderstood or face hardships, if we persevere and place our trust in God, He will always guide us to something good. Finally, we must remember that when interpreting the Bible, we should not impose modern ideas onto ancient stories, as this can distort the message the Bible is trying to convey. In John 8:12, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Let the light of God lead us through every challenge and difficulty. And always remember that He is the one who guides us to good things. Returning to Potiphar, although he played an important role in Joseph's story by being the official who bought Joseph and brought him into his house, he disappears from the biblical narrative after the false accusations made by Potiphar's wife. As for Joseph, his new responsibility as governor was immense. He was tasked with overseeing Egypt's preparations for the 7 years of famine that would follow the 7 years of plenty, as he had predicted. Pharaoh's dreams, combined with Joseph's wisdom and managerial abilities, led to a plan to store grain during the years of abundance. Under his leadership, Egypt harvested and stored a large quantity of food, filling warehouses in cities and ensuring there would be enough supplies to face the upcoming years of hardship. During these 7 years of abundance, Joseph had 2 sons with Asenath. The first son was Manasseh, which means, "God has made me forget all my hardship and my father's house," symbolizing healing and deliverance from past wounds. The second son was Ephraim, which means, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering," reflecting the prosperity Joseph experienced even in a foreign land. When the 7 years of famine finally arrived, the crisis became severe, not only in Egypt, but also in surrounding lands. Thanks to Joseph's wisdom, Egypt was well prepared, and he began distributing the stored food to the people, selling it in exchange for silver. As the famine spread, other nations began seeking help from Egypt, and Joseph became the savior of his time. Among those who came to Egypt to buy grain were Joseph's brothers. After years of suffering and famine, Joseph's brothers, the ones who had sold him into Egypt, were forced to go there to buy grain. However, when they met Joseph, they did not recognize him. Why was that? Because Joseph was now a powerful man, dressed in Egyptian noble attire, speaking Egyptian, and even communicating through an interpreter. But on the other hand, Joseph immediately recognized his brothers. This situation might seem a bit awkward, wouldn't it? Even though they were his blood brothers, time and circumstances had changed everything. Although Joseph's heart was filled with complex emotions, he did not immediately reveal his identity. Instead, he decided to test his brothers. He accused them of being spies, and anyone can sense the tension in the air when Joseph threatened to keep Simeon as a hostage and demanded they bring their younger brother Benjamin to prove their honesty. Joseph's perspective at this moment was perhaps a combination of suffering and patience. He wanted to know if his brothers had changed since the time he was sold. Can you imagine how his brothers must have felt at that moment? They were accused of being spies, and although they were somewhat confused and frightened, they decided to return to Egypt with Benjamin. This situation might make anyone reflect, would I have the courage to return and face my past? And when they returned, something interesting happened. Joseph threw a banquet for them. The question is, why would Joseph do that? Was it to show hospitality, or was there something deeper at play? After the feast, Joseph once again tested his brothers. He secretly placed a silver cup in Benjamin's sack and then accused them of stealing. Can you imagine the tension at that moment? Everything was now reaching a climax, and Joseph, as the one in power, threatened to keep Benjamin as a slave. But then, a miracle happened. At this moment, Judah, the brother who had once suggested selling Joseph, stood up and begged Joseph to take him as a slave in place of Benjamin. A man who had once been part of a wrong action now sacrificed himself for his brother. This was a touching moment because Judah not only loved Benjamin, but also wanted to protect their father, Jacob. This makes you ask yourself, could I sacrifice myself for someone else like that? And at that very moment, Joseph could no longer contain his emotions. He wept and finally revealed his true identity. Joseph's brothers stood there, stunned, unable to believe their eyes. Joseph embraced them and forgave all that they had done. God had used their wrong actions to bring about something good, to save many lives during the Great Famine. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Genesis 50:20. Let's pause for a moment and reflect. Have you ever encountered people who hurt you in the past and you felt you could never forgive them? But could we learn from Joseph to see difficult situations as opportunities for God to work and eventually look at everything with a heart of forgiveness? When Jacob heard that Joseph was alive, he couldn't believe his ears. After so many years of thinking his son was dead, he was now told that not only was Joseph alive, but he was also a powerful figure in Egypt. Imagine Jacob's emotions in that moment: joy, astonishment, and so many mixed feelings. He decided to move the whole family to Egypt, where Joseph and Pharaoh warmly welcomed them. They were given land in the region of Goshen, one of the best areas in Egypt, where they were not only provided with ample food, but also had the opportunity to grow and prosper. This story is not just a family tale, but also a lesson on forgiveness, sacrifice, and God's great plan. God never abandons us, even when we face our greatest challenges. As Joseph told his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." Genesis 50:20. Thank you for following the captivating story of Potiphar and Joseph. Through the hidden secrets in the pages of the Bible, we have discovered not just power, but also the loyalty and extraordinary character of Joseph. This story is not only a lesson in perseverance and faith, but also a testament to God's presence with us, even in the darkest times. What do you think about Potiphar and the doubts surrounding his role? Was he really a eunuch, or is it just a misunderstanding? This question remains open, and we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below this video. Share your reflections on this story and the lessons you've learned. If you want to continue the journey with us to explore the mysteries in the Bible, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss our latest videos. Let's explore more mysterious, powerful stories and life lessons that the Bible has to offer. Thank you for joining us in today's video. We wish you a wonderful day, and we hope to see you in the next videos. Remember, there are still many secrets in the Bible yet to be revealed, and together we will uncover them all.
Welcome to the Bible Hub Bible Stories channel, where we bring you inspiring and meaningful Bible stories. We are proud to introduce the talented screenwriter of our channel, a passionate young woman with a deep love for the Bible. She doesn't just write profound stories, but also helps viewers gain a deeper understanding of God's faith and love through each script. Writing scripts is not only her passion, but also her mission, which brings each video to life with energy and inspiration. We would also like to introduce the channel owner, the heart and soul of our channel. He constantly gives us all, overcoming any challenge to deliver the highest quality videos and convey a powerful message to everyone. We hope you'll continue to join us on our journey with Bible Hub, Bible stories, as we explore and spread the message of God. Thank you for your love and support.